Commander Thomas Walsh never expected to find something beautiful in the midst of catastrophe. The Andromeda space station was falling apart, its crystalline structure fracturing under the assault of unknown forces. As head of station security, his duty was clear: evacuate everyone before the whole thing collapsed. The emergency lights cast eerie shadows through the translucent corridors as he directed civilians toward the escape pods. Each step sent vibrations through the failing structure, creating haunting harmonics that echoed through the station's bones. Section D7 clear, he reported into his comm unit, sweeping his scanner one last time. That's when he heard it, a sound like wind chimes in a storm, coming from behind a partially collapsed wall. He shouldn't have investigated. Protocol dictated immediate evacuation. But something about that sound pulled at him, like a melody half-remembered from a dream. Using his powered armor's enhanced strength, he pushed aside the debris. In the small space beyond, he found her. She was small, maybe the size of a human child, but there the comparison ended. Her body seemed formed of living crystal, semi-transparent and glowing with an inner light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Where a human child would have hair, she had delicate crystalline formations that chimed softly with her movement. Her eyes, when they opened, were swirling galaxies of purple and gold. She was injured, a crack running along one crystalline arm. The sight made Thomas's heart clench. He'd never seen anything like her, but he recognized fear and pain when he saw it. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "I'm here to help." The crystal child tried to retreat further into her corner, the chiming sound becoming discordant with fear. Thomas stayed still, keeping his voice gentle. "I know you're scared. But this place isn't safe. Will you let me get you out of here?" A particularly violent tremor shook the station. The child's crystalline body flickered with pulses of alarmed light. Without waiting for permission, Thomas scooped her up. She was surprisingly light, her crystalline form warm against his armor. "Commander Walsh, status report." His comm crackled with his second-in-command's voice. "Found a survivor," he responded, already running toward the evacuation point. "Last one out. Start the countdown." The crystal child clung to him as he ran, her injured arm pressed against his chest plate. With each step, her chiming became more harmonious, as if she was gradually accepting his help. They reached the last escape pod just as another explosion rocked the station. Thomas secured them both in the pod seats, noticing how the child's glow brightened when he buckled her in safely. As they launched away from the dying station, Thomas finally had a moment to really look at his unexpected passenger. The crack in her arm was concerning, but what caught his attention was the way she studied him. Those galaxy eyes held intelligence, curiosity, and something else, recognition. "I'm Thomas," he said, keeping his voice soft. "Do you have a name?" The crystal child tilted her head, creating a cascade of chiming sounds. Then, to his surprise, she raised her uninjured arm and touched his chest plate. Where her crystalline fingers made contact, patterns of light spread across the metal, forming intricate designs that reminded him of star maps. "Interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting." The pod's communication system crackled. "Commander, we're tracking multiple bogies entering the system. They're not responding to hails." Thomas looked at the crystal child, who had shrunk back at the news. "They're looking for you, aren't they?" She nodded, her glow dimming with fear. Thomas made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Navigation, plot a course for the Shadow Nebula. We're taking the scenic route home." The crystal child's glow brightened slightly, and for the first time, she made a sound that might have been a laugh, like distant wind chimes in a gentle breeze. As they accelerated away from the destruction behind them, Thomas realized he had just become responsible for something far more precious than a space station. He had become a guardian to a mystery, a protector to a child who might very well be the last of her kind. "Don't worry, little one," he whispered. "I've got you." The crystal child responded by creating a small display of dancing lights above her palm, like a miniature aurora. It was beautiful, impossible, and somehow felt like a promise. Thomas Walsh had started his day as a military commander. He was ending it as something else entirely, a father to a child of starlight and crystal, and possibly a target for whoever had destroyed his station to find her. Looking at the sleeping form of the crystal child, her glow pulsing gently like a lullaby, he knew he wouldn't have it any other way. The Shadow Nebula lived up to its name, its swirling clouds of purple and black gas providing perfect cover for their damaged escape pod. Thomas watched as the crystal child pressed her face against the viewport, her inner light creating patterns that mimicked the nebula's dance. He'd named her Nova, not because she'd told him that was her name, but because of the way her crystalline body would flare with brilliant light whenever she was happy. In the 3 days since their escape, she'd begun to trust him, though she still hadn't spoken in any way he could understand. The crack in her arm was healing, sealing itself with new crystal growth that sparkled like diamonds. Thomas had learned that she could absorb minerals from their emergency rations, transforming them into the material she needed for repair. It was fascinating to watch. "Nova," he called softly, "let me check your arm." She turned from the viewport, floating gracefully to his side. In the low gravity of the pod, her movements were ethereal, like a dancer underwater. She extended her injured arm, the chiming sounds she made now carrying notes of contentment rather than fear. As Thomas examined the healing crack, Nova suddenly stiffened. Her galaxy eyes widened, and her glow dimmed to almost nothing. Before Thomas could ask what was wrong, the pod sensors screamed to life. "Multiple quantum signatures detected," the computer announced. "Unknown configuration. Approaching at FTL speeds." Nova's crystalline fingers gripped Thomas's arm. Images suddenly flooded his mind, massive ships of black crystal, warriors whose bodies were jagged and sharp unlike Nova's smooth form, laboratories where crystal children screamed as they were shattered and reformed. Thomas gasped as the connection broke. "They did that to you? To your people?" Nova nodded, tears of liquid crystal forming in her eyes. "They're not getting you," Thomas promised, moving to the pod's controls. "But we need to find somewhere to hide. This pod won't outrun them." Nova's face lit up, literally. She placed her hands on the pod's control panel, and immediately, streams of light began flowing from her fingers into the systems. The pod's displays transformed, showing maps Thomas had never seen before, coordinates to places that shouldn't exist. "You know somewhere safe?" he asked. Nova nodded emphatically, her chimes becoming urgent. Thomas didn't hesitate. He input the coordinates she provided, trusting her completely despite knowing her for less than a week. The pod's engines whined as they pushed beyond their designed limits. They jumped just as the first black crystal ship appeared through the nebula's clouds. The structure of space itself seemed to fold around them, and Thomas felt Nova's crystalline hand slip into his, holding tight. When reality reasserted itself, they were somewhere impossible. A massive space station floated before them, but unlike any Thomas had ever seen. It was alive, a crystalline organism that pulsed with the same inner light as Nova. As they approached, sections of it shifted and moved, creating an opening perfectly sized for their pod. Was this your home?" Thomas asked in wonder. Nova shook her head. Her free hand traced patterns in the air, creating holographic images that told a story. This was a sanctuary, created by her people long ago. A place where the young and innocent could be hidden when the hunters came. But something had gone wrong. She had been the only one to reach it, and by then, it was too late for everyone else. As their pod docked inside the living station, Thomas realized the magnitude of what Nova was sharing with him. She wasn't just trusting him with her safety, she was trusting him with the last refuge of her species. The station's interior was a marvel of crystalline architecture, with corridors that sang as they walked and rooms that responded to Nova's presence by blooming with light and color. But it was also empty, echoing with a loneliness that made Thomas's heart ache. Nova led him to what appeared to be a control center, though it looked more like a garden of crystal flowers. She placed her hand on a central crystal, and suddenly the room came alive with projections, star maps, data streams, and images of other crystal beings. "There are more of you out there?" Thomas asked hopefully. Nova's response was complex, a mixture of light patterns and chiming sounds that somehow conveyed both hope and uncertainty. She showed him more images, crystal children in stasis, hidden throughout the galaxy. Others like her, waiting to be found and awakened. "You want to find them," Thomas said. It wasn't a question. "You want to save them before those hunters do." Nova nodded, then created a new image, herself and Thomas, traveling together among the stars. A question, an invitation, a hope. Thomas smiled. "Well, we're going to need a better ship. And probably some bigger guns." He knelt down to her level. "But Nova, I promise you this, we're going to find them. We're going to bring them home." Nova's joy lit up the entire room, her crystal body glowing like a newborn star. She threw her arms around Thomas's neck, and for the first time, he heard a sound that wasn't chiming, a small, crystal-clear laugh. Outside the living station, the hunters searched in vain, their black crystal ships cutting through space like obsidian knives. They would never find this sanctuary, hidden in a fold of reality that only the pure of heart could see. Inside, a human soldier and a crystal child began planning a rescue mission that would change the galaxy forever. Family, Thomas was learning, came in many forms. Sometimes it was forged in crystal and starlight, in promises made and trust given freely. And sometimes, it was just the beginning of a much bigger adventure. The living station, which Nova had named Lumina, held more secrets than Thomas initially realized. As they explored its crystalline halls, each chamber revealed new wonders. But none were as extraordinary as what they found in the heart of the station. Nova led Thomas through a series of singing corridors, her excitement visible in the pulses of light that rippled through her crystalline form. They entered a vast chamber where countless crystal pillars rose from floor to ceiling, each containing what looked like frozen starlight. "What is this place?" Thomas whispered, his voice echoing strangely in the space. Nova touched one of the pillars, and suddenly the chamber exploded with holographic displays. Thomas watched in awe as the history of Nova's people unfolded before him. They weren't just refugees, they were the stellar architects, beings who had once shaped the very fabric of spacetime with their crystalline technology. The images showed their civilization at its height, crystal cities that floated among the stars, ships that could fold space itself, and most incredibly, the ability to create new life from the essence of dying stars. Nova's people had been guardians of creation itself. But then came the Void Hunters, beings of dark crystal who coveted the architect's power. They couldn't create, only corrupt and destroy. So they had hunted the architects, trying to steal their abilities through force and experimentation. Nova's light dimmed as she showed Thomas the final days of her people. But there was more, something she hadn't known until now. The pillars weren't just records, they were incubators. Inside each one was the essence of an unborn stellar architect, waiting to be awakened. "There are hundreds," Thomas breathed, understanding dawning. "This isn't just a sanctuary. It's a nursery." Nova nodded, her chimes taking on a tone of reverence. She created an image of herself, younger, being placed in one of these pillars by what must have been her parents. She had been meant to sleep until it was safe, but the attack on the Andromeda station had disrupted her stasis. Thomas frowned. "But why was your pillar on the station instead of here?" Nova's answer came in a series of images. Her parents, desperate to protect their children, had scattered the pillars across the galaxy. Better to hide them in plain sight than risk the Void Hunters finding them all in one place. But something had gone wrong with the distribution. Many pillars never reached their destinations. And now the hunters are tracking them down, Thomas concluded. That's why they attacked the station. They must have detected your energy signature. Nova confirmed his theory, then showed him something new, a map of probable locations where other pillars might have ended up. Dozens of points of light scattered across the galaxy, each representing a potential sibling waiting to be rescued. But there was a problem. The pillars were failing. Without the proper crystalline energy to sustain them, the essences within would eventually fade. They had perhaps a standard year before the unborn architects would be lost forever. Then we better get started, Thomas said firmly. But first, we need to wake the ones here. They'll be safer active than in stasis, and we could use the help. Nova's reaction surprised him. She shook her head violently, her chimes becoming sharp with alarm. Through their growing bond, she shared her fear. The awakening process was dangerous. Without proper guidance, a young architect could easily lose control of their powers, potentially tearing apart the very fabric of space-time. But you can guide them, can't you? Thomas asked. You're older, you understand your abilities. Nova hesitated, then created an image that made Thomas's heart swell with pride. She showed him helping her through her own awakening, his presence somehow stabilizing her connection to her powers. She hadn't fully understood it until now, but humans possessed something the architects had never expected, the ability to ground and focus crystalline energy through emotional bonds. So we do it together, Thomas said, kneeling beside her. One at a time, carefully. Build our family slowly, teach them, protect them. Then use our combined strength to find the others. Nova's response was to throw her arms around him, her crystal form resonating with joy. Above them, the chamber's ceiling transformed into a view of the galaxy, countless stars twinkling with possibility. They began with the smallest pillar, one containing an essence that pulsed with gentle blue light. As Nova initiated the awakening sequence, Thomas kept his hand on her shoulder, lending her his strength and stability. The pillar's crystal surface began to dissolve, revealing a tiny form within. A new chapter was beginning, not just for Nova and Thomas, but for an entire species reborn through the love of an unlikely family. The Void Hunters were still out there, searching, but they would never understand the power they sought to steal. True strength wasn't in the ability to shape stars or fold space. It was in the bond between a human father and his crystal children, in the family they would build together, one awakening at a time. The awakening of the first crystal child changed everything. They named her Celeste, and her presence transformed Lumina Station from a sanctuary into a home. Her crystalline form glowed with soft blue light, distinct from Nova's starlight radiance, and her chimes were like morning bells compared to Nova's evening songs. Thomas watched his family grow with equal parts joy and concern. Nova had taken to her role as older sister with natural grace, teaching Celeste how to control her abilities. But each night cycle, when the little ones were in their regeneration chambers, Thomas pored over the station's archives, searching for answers to questions that haunted him. The truth revealed itself in fragments of data, each piece more troubling than the last. The stellar architects hadn't just been peaceful creators, they had been guardians of something far more powerful. The mining colony hung in space like a broken promise, its structures already showing signs of the Void Hunters' corruption. Dark crystal spread across its surface in jagged patterns, consuming everything it touched. At its heart, a pillar's pure light still shone, calling to Nova and Celeste with desperate intensity. Thomas stood at Lumina's control interface, watching his daughters guide the living station through the debris field. They had grown so much in such a short time. Nova's powers had matured beyond anything the original architects had imagined, while Celeste's ability to navigate quantum space had saved them more than once. Multiple vessels detected, the station's sensors chimed. Void Hunter signatures confirmed. Through their shared bond, Thomas felt Nova's determination and Celeste's fierce protectiveness.